Hello, good day. Um, it's nice to be here. Glad to be here. Okay, so I'll be sharing with us on the topic homegrown or foreign breed, a perspective on early language access for Nigerian deaf or deaf Nigerian kids. It's written by Benjamin Okon, Henshaw Samuel, Godslove Obuaha, and Precious Ozomene. We are all from the Save the Deaf and Endangered Language Initiative research team. It's on the occasion of the first Indigenous Hands and Voices of African Identity. Okay, so in this presentation, we are making a case for what should be used as the system of learning for Nigerian deaf kids. We are saying that it is better, or Nigerian deaf kids will do better when they are being taught in the indigenous signs that they are exposed to from birth. Let's go quickly into what we have here. Okay, give me some minutes. My slide is loading. Okay, here it is. So the content, we have introduction, the background, sign language as a full-fledged language, deaf children in Nigeria, sign language rights of the Nigerian deaf child, factors that hinder early language access for deaf children in Nigeria, homegrown or foreign breed, question, then recommendation, then we have conclusion and references. Okay, so background, Nigeria has the largest deaf population in Africa, according to World Health Organization. Population is at 43 million. And then in Nigeria, we have established deaf communities, well-known deaf communities, especially in places like Kano and Kaduna. Okay, children are born deaf everywhere in the world. Others become deaf in their childhood age. Some children acquire deafness, so to say, they are born deaf from birth, while some, as a result of physical factor, they become deaf during their childhood age. Studies have actually suggested that over 95% of deaf children are born by hearing parents who obviously have no knowledge of sign language. That's according to the World Federation of the Deaf in 2016. Okay, so with early language access and early education, deaf children are able to develop adequate cognitive and linguistic skills like hearing children. Deaf children have the same cognitive ability like hearing children. So when they are exposed to language at an early stage, they learn to acquire or they learn to adapt easily to the abilities that are innate in them that will help them in life generally. Okay, so sign language is a full-fledged language. There's been several misconceptions of if sign language is a language. It is. Over 20 years ago, when studies reveal that sign languages are natural languages that developed among deaf communities across the world, people could not believe it. As I said earlier, there has been a lot of contestation here and there. Sign language, a language or thereabouts. So before then, sign languages were confused with gestures and were called gestural signs. And in the wake of 20th century, sign language started to gain recognition as the spoken language. So today, sign language have become the cultural pride of the deaf community in the world. And sign languages are emerging from homes, villages, nations with different varieties based on the location the speakers or the signers rather are found. Okay, so let's take a look at deaf children in Nigeria. Our studies have shown that up to 75% of deaf children in Nigeria do not have access to sign language until they get to school. Studied by Asanye and Emerson and Edwards 2018. This is actually a fact that has been proven by the following scholars. It has been seen that children who are deaf, born deaf in Nigeria, they spend close to 8 years before getting access to a language. The reason being that most Nigerian deaf children are born into hearing families, and then most times it's difficult for parents to accept the situation of their children, so they do all they could to try combat deafness before they even accept it. So, and also deafness to a large extent in Nigeria is considered a disability. So no parent wants his or her child to be disabled. So they have to put up a fight to change it. So all these factors, all these things lead to the child being delayed language access at an early stage, which is not actually appropriate. So, however, in some countries, we are getting to know that deafness is no longer a disability in some country. It is actually a mark of uniqueness, as some persons have come to see. So this is because deafness, as it is, introduce a person to different way of communication. Okay, that's the sign form of language as opposed to the spoken language. Okay, so sign language rights of the Nigerian deaf child. Language rights are concerned with the rules that public institutions adapt with respect to language use in a variety of different domains, according to Kimlicka and Pattern in 2013. The rights provided for the spoken languages is also provided for the sign languages. According to the UNCRPD, the UNCRPD entitles deaf people on an equal basis with others to recognition and support of their specific cultural linguistic identity, including sign language and deaf culture. So the right a child who can speak is entitled to is the same right that a deaf child is entitled to. The right to early access of language at an infant stage, and the right to express his or her linguistic heritage, or express his or her linguistic identity. So from the following positions of the rights of a child concerning language, we could deduce that every Nigerian child who is deaf has the right to education, and also we could say that the recognition and further promotion of sign language indigenous to Nigerian deaf child should be top priority, as this will aid their easy, to aid their easy adaptation to understanding things being taught in school and so on and so forth. So we look at the factors that hinder early language access for deaf children in Nigeria. As hearing children are exposed to spoken language and verbal communication from birth, deaf children should be exposed to sign language at birth, according to Kushanagla and others in 2010. But the problem is, this is not what we experience here in Nigeria as it is, because there are several factors that fight against children being exposed to language at an early stage. First of all, is a parent ignorance to sign language. Up to, as we've said already, up to 95% of deaf children in Nigeria are born by hearing parents, and they have little or no experience, little or no knowledge of sign language. This is one of the factors that really hinder the children being exposed to language at an early stage. Okay, there is always this factor. There is also another factor of denial and rejection of deafness. There's a strong social stigma that is attached to deafness, and then it makes it impossible for most parents to accept the fact that their children will not hear for the rest of their life. So this stigma is always there, from the community, from friends, even from religious gathering and the rest. So it is now a strong responsibility on the parents to ensure that they don't that such evil per se does not happen or do not stick around with their children for a long while. So this factor will hinder the parents from knowing what is right and exposing the child to a language, a sign language at an early stage. This delay is what invariably or in a long run will cause the child to have issues academically, as you will see in the later part of this work. We also have religious deception. Parents are advised by prayer houses and also the so-called miracle working religious groups. They spend years seeking for cure to deafness, and most times there is no result to this. At the end of the day, the child has lost time, the parents, they've lost resources. It's difficult for the child to meet up with other children who are probably born deaf in a community where there are a lot of signers, and they can equally or easily adapt, they can easily access language at an early stage. We also have traditional prescription as one of the factors. Okay, the community misinform parents on what is the traditional method of curing deafness, traditional method of management or managing deaf children. All these are different, all these are totally different from what should be, because the information is not accurate, nothing done is the right thing, so it causes delay altogether. So these are the factors. The next one is non-recognition of the indigenous sign language in the child's environment. If a child is born deaf, it is expected that the parents who probably have no or little knowledge of sign language, so it's expected that they get to a community of the deaf people around them. Nigeria has probably few concentrated deaf communities, and once that realization comes at an early stage, it helps the child to integrate. It helps the child to grow with other kids. So parents, so that the ability not to recognize that sign language is also part of the community it's a major factor, because some persons believe that only spoken language is the only language accessible in a community. So it's quite difficult for parents who in such situation, it's quite difficult for them to find a solution immediately, because they have no knowledge or they don't recognize sign language as a language in a child's environment. And lastly is the foreign sign language factor, which is a major factor and one that this research explicates most. A child is supposed to be exposed to a language at birth, and then we find out that if after that and at a formal situation where a child will be subjected to learning a new language formally, it is expected that the child should learn the language of his immediate environment in school, or the language he is being taught in should be the language of his immediate environment. That's not the case, and that's what will lead us to the next slide, which is that homegrown or foreign breed. The language that Nigerian deaf children are exposed to, is it a homegrown language or is it foreign breed? How do they cope with it? Nigerian deaf kids, as we've shown earlier, based on research by Asonya and others, start school between the ages of 7 to 8. Their formal language in school is the American Sign Language, that's the ASL, not the homegrown indigenous language they are used to. There is a case in one of our outreaches in Abuja. One of the deaf students actually told us of his ordeal of how he fails English language and he had difficulty to understand the American Sign Language system. Okay, this scenario would have been averted if the child was being taught in the indigenous language, his own indigenous sign language that he knows at home. So the use of ASL does not actually mirror the cultural notion and interpretation of a typical Nigerian deaf community. It doesn't. Language expresses the cultural identity of an individual. So homegrown sign indigenous language is the cultural identity of the Nigerian deaf child. In order not to allow children to grow with a fragmented sense of belonging, they have to be a way, they have to be or an option where they learn in the language of their immediate environment, which is their own indigenous signs. This will give them that sense of belonging because ASL is actually foreign and it has nothing to do with the system that they are exposed to in their community. Next, we also see that it is very obvious that there is actually a great difference between the ASL and the indigenous Nigerian sign language, be it whatever variety, be it the variety in Port Harcourt, in Bauchi, in Kaduna, and so on and so forth. We had in 2018, the research team, we had a documentation exercise in Magajingari community in Kaduna, and then there were several findings that we saw. We can summarize most of those findings by saying that the signs that we documented in this community, it's actually a community where deaf kids are born and they acquire the language. And we discovered that most of the signs are ethnographically constrained. By that, we mean that there is always a cultural aspect to a particular word sign. For instance, in one of our data collection exercise, we discovered that the word name is signed by slicing, using the right hand to slice across the neck. Okay, that's actually symbolic. When a child is born, it is believed that there is always a ceremony where a goat is killed, a chicken is killed, or maybe a cow, depending on the social status of the parents. So when you want to ask what is your name in that deaf community, it is not finger spelled. It is actually rather demonstrated, is expressive by slicing the right hand across the neck. That's an indication of what took place when you were born. So it gives the speaker, or give the signer, give the language user that sense of identity, that, oh, you know where I'm coming from, you know, this is what happens when a child is born. So we can actually identify people's name by this sign. So most words are not signed out of context. So names are given based on tribal marks, position of the body, height, husband's occupation, facial structure, and so on and so forth. And still also from our findings, we discovered that they do not spell words. They do not spell words, but they have a demonstrative based morphological system where, for example, we remember we asked one of the consultants to sign the word snake, and then it was actually demonstrated. It wasn't spelled. He swindled his hands from one direction to the other to show the movement of a snake. Actually, it wasn't finger spelled. So these are few evidence to show that the system that is actually indigenous to Nigerian Deaf, the Nigerian Deaf is quite different from what they are exposed to in school. So we would like to make few recommendations. So the recommendation is aimed at achieving early language access for Nigerian deaf children. So first of all, deaf community must be recognized as a linguistic cultural community. As stated earlier, the deaf people in Nigeria are seen as sick, are seen as people who are unfortunate, and are seen as people who are cursed. But if the perception is changed And then we view the deaf community as a distinct linguistic cultural community with their own distinct code of communication. It will go a long way to help these ones have a sense of belonging in this community where they find themselves to begin with. Okay, so and also we will like to recommend that indigenous national sign language must be developed and constitutionally recognized. According to Nkube, in 2009, no country with a developed deaf population uses a foreign national sign language. Nigeria is one that is using a foreign national sign language, and that has actually caused so much issue in the in conventionalizing the signing script of the indigenous Nigerian language as it were. So legislation must be passed for the recognition of this sign language, indigenous Nigerian sign language, when it is fully developed. Being fully developed and being used as a tool in education will help reduce the impact of colonialism, which we may not be passing through at this early period or at this stage, being that everyone is actually independent, but yet in action, in the mind, in way of behavior and the rest, there's still evidence of colonialism being found in our own expression as Nigerians. Next recommendation is that indigenous national sign language must be used for deaf education. So studies show that students who first acquire their mother tongue have a strong linguistic background to do better in a second language learning than those with poor linguistic background. So most deaf children we have encountered, they actually have poor performance in writing English and so on and so forth. So we believe that if the Nigerian Indigenous Sign Language is developed, it should be recognized constitutionally, and also it should be used in teaching the deaf from the initial ages to adulthood. Okay, so another recommendation is there should be an attitudinal change towards sign language that must go across board. Everyone from the parents must ensure that their deaf children acquire sign language before they go to school. Deaf adults must play a role in modeling language to younger deaf persons. Linguists must embrace sign language studies to expand research in that area. Universities should also teach courses that touches sign language, just like spoken languages are being taught, while the government must recognize sign language and place much emphasis on how it can be used as a tool for teaching the deaf. And also the development of indigenous sign language must be everybody's priority for the development of the Nigerian deaf child. So in conclusion, I would say that learning and education for the Nigerian deaf children should be in the indigenous Nigerian sign language, that's the homegrown, instead of the American sign language, which is a foreign breed. Because early exposure of the Nigerian deaf children to an indigenous sign language being acquired as a strong first language will enable the children to become bilinguals, thereby helping them to explore benefits of bilingualism necessary for the development of literacy and numeracy skills. Thank you.